This is the third series in the third year, indeed, of the Laureateship of podcasts that I have made with some of my fellow writers, in which I ask what the hell stroke heaven it is that we do. Not expecting or even needing an answer, but in not getting an answer, maybe some signpost directions towards an answer. I really hope you enjoy them. Today I'm talking, much to my delight, to Colm Tóibín. And we've known each other for 35 years, and he is much older than me by 2 months, but he really has been an extraordinary bonfire, extraordinary light for me, and a reason sometimes to keep going, sometimes to rethink things and think things for the first time. He's a great prompter of thought. His achievement in those 35 years has been immense, with novels such as Brooklyn, The Master, which is about Henry James, just peerless books. I'm just for once a little trepidatious about talking to somebody because I revere him on the other side of idolatry. So Colm Tóibín. So man dear, beloved man dear, I've done a number of these, but never with someone whose DNA I suspect might have mixed with mine by now. We know each other such a long time. I know you slightly longer than I know my wife. And in many ways, here I am at 64, I have, to some degree, measured my process and measured things I've done, and done them in some curious way in consort with you, even at the great distance between us sometimes. I appreciate, of course, that you're far older than me, 2 months, and I therefore I must bow to your superiority and or your olderness. But I did, after 42 years, and I think it's 30 years since The South was published, it's the anniversary next year, come to wondering maybe something that you shouldn't think about if we are to be properly superstitious about what we do. But the question that was in my mind coming in to be laureate was, what is this thing that we do? You've been a very substantial journalist. You've also worked in academia, but it's not there, I think, our answer lies, if there is an answer. Do you ever wonder, in respect of what we do, about those other creatures we were before we were this strange Homo sapiens person, which is only 300,000 years old, that million years of some other hominid and what they were expecting from their own arts? Do you feel any responsibility, actually in your DNA, since we raised the issue of DNA, backwards to these creatures who are silent, being this creature who is the opposite of silent, who is eloquent in the face of silence?
I suppose I live in history much more than I would live in, in other words, I would live in 100 years rather than 1,000 years. And I would have a sense of silences that came before me, in the immediate generations before me, of people who might have done things who didn't, of people who didn't get chances, that they didn't have the confidence, or just circumstances were not there for people. And that silence is certainly there. And when you start working with the tradition and you start looking at what's before William Carleton, when William Carleton walks out of Monaghan or Cavan in those years, in the second or third decade of the 19th century, why is he the first voice, and why is his voice so strange, so fluent at certain times and so hesitant at others, and why is he such a gnarled, difficult presence? And so just that idea of the dark Irish 19th century being a very dark time for writing, in the sense that that you get Dracula, you get Melmoth the Wanderer, you get Sheridan Le Fanu, but there's in the very time when a heroic thing is going on in the neighbouring island, in Dickens to George Eliot, Thackeray, Trollope, that we have just this strange silence.
That the sun was in Britain, but the rain was in Ireland.
Yeah, and
Which can't be
that in
true.
other words, in order to make a novel, it seemed at a certain point as though you would need a house, some parkland, and a lot of sense of tradition, or meaning of that money could be passed on from one generation to the next, and that love would end in a wedding.
Yes.
And the wedding would end in the next generation.
Yes.
But that didn't exist here. So that I suppose all of that is there somewhere in the background, but sometimes the background is much more personal than that.
So,
and it arises really from the whole idea of just wanting to perform, or wanting to, having an impulse that to actually write something down, almost as though it were a melody, and that being very natural, almost visceral, and then you start doing it, and then you start making it into a sort of work. But it came naturally.
So Carlton broke a great silence. We were lacking in a proper collection of Gad's Hills, Gad's Hill being Dickens's house. Although we are ignoring, well, there is a sort of silence in the Great House, isn't there, up to this point?
But I think what we're ignoring really is also that some of that, what I've just said, is sort of nonsense, in the sense that the business of reading is so porous that when I was 17 or 18, I was reading Kafka or I was reading Hemingway. And it wasn't as though I was feeling that I had no right to these books. These were the books that were in easels,
yes,
and that you could go in and buy them and read them. And there wasn't as though you were reading Irish stuff, or you were, so the books are, the whole business of books is so porous.
Yes, but when you're a young writer, you do have an immense appetite and need for friendship with the dead, as it were. I remember in Paris when I was 22, getting a ticket for the British Library. Or the British Council, what was it called?
British Council,
yeah. And getting, for some reason, they entrusted me, this penniless, down-at-heel Irish creature, with volumes of Joyce's letters and Yeats's letters, and bringing them back to my little room and being completely dismayed by the fever of Joyce's, whatever condition being that was, and the rather pacific state of being that was Yeats, but assuming that somehow that I would be in friendship with them. Who were the writers? Who did you befriend retrospectively?
Well, I think that anyone growing up where I did, and I mean Yeats, the early Yeats poems were so seductive, and his presence and the whole sense of his achievement. He was certainly there. It took me much longer to get in touch with Joyce, but by that time I had really, really been paying attention to Hemingway, and certainly to Kafka. And also at that time, it's strange the way it goes out of fashion, Sartre was very well known as a novelist then, so that the trilogy called Roads to Freedom and Iron in the Soul. Certainly Iron in the Soul was a book that everyone was reading. And you never Guernica. Except me, of course. Guernica was on the cover, and these were terribly good books. And obviously Camus, L'Étranger, these were the books.
Well, we were the children, we were modernist children. The thing, in a way, we didn't, I don't think, realize it, or I certainly didn't for 10 or 15 years into writing, was that was the thing we had to break. Our intoxication was the idea of modernism, which also seemed to include the idea, and I remember you writing about one of my books years ago along these lines, of not needing an audience at some level.
Yeah.
That these were objects being made.
That extraordinary period when books were written that had the reader built into them. Yeah. That it was as though At Swim Two Birds was written and the student was his own reader, as well as making a world with Mr. Trellis and all the other characters, that he would read the book so that it wouldn't actually need a reader, which Watergate, of course, worked on very closely as well. Yeah. And it's
you said this about The Engine of Our Life.
I did about The Engine of Our Life, that there was so much parody in it.
It was the last book that didn't need a reader.
That of that particular school, I think, of Irish writing, that The Engine of Your book was the last, and then something else began, which was I mean, in a way, writing in a much more minor key, I think certainly what I've been doing has certainly been in a much more minor key.
I think in the past I've seen you, in your infinitely gentle way, take exception to the word storyteller. You don't want to be.
It really is an issue where I found it being used about Ireland and about me.
Yeah.
And it would come with an English accent, and it would be wonderfully enthusiastic. And with the person speaking have no idea just what this sounded like to say, you're all marvellous storytellers in Ireland, the Irish storytelling tradition.
Yes.
And when I think, people say, I think about all the silences, all the things never mentioned, all the stories not told, and coming out of quite an austere tradition, actually. I mean, I'm talking about at home.
Yes,
of
I
things
understand.
not being said. That I didn't recognise this at all. And it wasn't as though in the evening by the campfire some old aunt or granny sat down and started to tell the story of Finn McCool or some other. It was low-level gossip in a small town was the nearest you got to storytelling. So I mean, I just found that it's Hart Hodgkin took enormous exception to being called a colourist, even though he sort of was one. But he rather found that when people said call him it was a way of bringing him down somewhere.
And I'm a great believer in taking exception.
As other painters didn't have a structure. So also, I'm not that interested in story. You know.
Yes. Well, I suppose that's what's happened to me in recent years, is that I've realised there is a thing called story that is part of what you could say the wider communal DNA of making a book, that it wants to go there.
But hold on, I mean, there's a, you see, you could claim that style is the structure which keeps story up. But if you move it the other way around, which I think is how you work, which is that story is the structure that keeps style up. So you have to have something to actually scaffold the style. Because you can't just have the style operating free flow.
I did try that.
Yes, I know you did. And you did it in the theatre as well, in the early plays. But then you realise, I know what I can do. I can bring in a story, and the story will give me all the architecture I need for this inner space, which is called style. And so you find a structure for your style, which is called story. But it's not the other way around.
Good. See, now I'll think about that for a few years.
Just you need. Yeah,
this is going to produce a silence.
I've been waiting for some time to tell you this.
Well, this is the
I'm
ideal.
so glad that I got the chance just now.
Yes, that will produce the ultimate silence, I think. Well, the reason I trepidatiously mentioned storyteller is that you are talking about the last 100 years. You are talking about writing things down. You are talking about that strange, very recent technique that, as a creature, that we have devised of communicating our music, as you might say, even if it's just a whistle tune in my case. But it's how we do it. And then miraculously this thing can be put in somebody's lap and produce somehow this cinematic, or whatever, however you describe it, this cinema before cinema effect in their lap, and the miracle of that. And you're talking about a time, what's before Carlton? Well, what's before that is that storytelling on the hoof. I mean, the important thing I learned from writing, say, Bosgrady's Boys, which was written in '86, was that the mythology of two old brothers like that, of course younger than us now, wasn't Finn McCool and all the rest of it. It was the bloody Marx Brothers in the local cinema. It was whatever harvest of imagination they could bring home from the cinema in the town. And that becomes there. And the importance of those things, to truly identify your mythology, is the first job. If you remember, Brendan Kennelly used to say, a writer without a mythology has no chance to do anything good. But we had to identify what that mythology was, and it wasn't always going to be our... But before all that, surely there is that person and that fireplace. You said campfire, I think you meant your aunt sitting by the fire in the winter.
Yeah. I was exaggerating about the campfire.
Yeah.
We didn't do campfires.
You know, you brought it out into the garden.
Yeah.
If you bring it back into the house,
indoors,
and you say to me in this revelatory way what I'm doing, but it is something for me. I maybe haven't been in the Gaeltacht as a little boy. Something to do with the fact that you're on that side and they're on that side, and unless you cross that space of warmth with the chill of the room on your back, with something that's going to hold them, they will fall asleep, or they will go and make a cup of tea, or they will drift off and think, or they will feel that enormous embarrassment that sometimes we feel in the theatre when something's not good. So this is what we want to avoid. And it seems to me that it's that whole impromptu, even though written down, nature of storytelling that cuts the mustard in that instance. I mean, God bless you, but the story told in Brooklyn is so much of that nature. It is so much...
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it goes against everything I'm saying theoretically, because
thank God.
It was a story heard, there was a fire lighting, it was a small room, and I was listening. So you're straight out of that idea of... But it was only half the story was told. I had to imagine the rest.
Also, it's not a story told by your aunt, it's a story told by the ancient mariner, right?
Well, it was somebody came to the house, and... she told the story, and I was 12, and 40 years later, or 45 years later, it became very useful. Yeah. Because it was on my mind, the whole idea of returning and leaving and returning and leaving, and ideas of home and identity, and how all that gets strained and put under pressure. What I on the question of style and story, that I think that when you're writing, or when I'm working, and I think when you're working, the idea of the reader as a character. In other words, that as you're writing something, you think, do I need one more thing here to make this more clear, more dramatic, more interesting? And more interesting is perhaps the hardest one to admit. I need to do one more thing here, because if I don't, I could lose the reader's interest in this. And I can try rhythm, because rhythm is one way of holding attention where the reader doesn't quite know why they're turning the page, but they're holding the page with rhythm. But if you overdo that or become conscious of it, you can lose it. You need one thing. And often you need to close a chapter too early just to keep the reader going. Open a chapter with some entirely new thing. Leave out a whole journey. For example, in Brooklyn, where the first time she goes to America, the farewell scene with her mother is simply not there. I thought it was too cliched, first of all, but I thought also, don't do it. Just don't have that. The reader can imagine it was hard and it was sad, but what if it wasn't in the book?
Yes.
You could then, and you become aware of this when the book was filmed, so that I know the difference now, is that you're packed with the reader, is that the reader has to imagine everything. Where the buttons were, what colour was the jacket, what her, what she... So the reader is constantly in a state of imagining a scene that you're only giving clues to. So the book becomes a set of clues, and you need to know how many clues do I need to give for the reader to be able to fully imagine the scene that I have imagined for the reader. And so a novel becomes a set not of details or scene setting, but a set of clues where the reader fills in the details, and the reader does the scene setting. And so the reader becomes a sort of figure in the way you imagine.
I mean, how would you define the value of this artifact? What is the value of this thing that we do?
I suppose with Wallace Stevens' notes towards the supreme fiction, he includes it must give pleasure, doesn't he? If he doesn't, he does, doesn't he? It must give pleasure. So that idea, first of all, that you begin with not necessarily this is a form of entertainment.
No.
But it gives pleasure. In other words, that there's a richness involved, and a sort of a level of being somebody saying something and you sit up and you want to listen to it. Yeah. It's the same as a singer singing a song. Yes. In other words, that whatever it is you turn.
Yes. And
sometimes it happens with me when I'm reading, where I just stop for a second and go, "Oh Lord, over something someone does or says, but also over just a sentence itself, just somewhere or other there's something.
And maybe sometimes when you're writing, you have.
Yeah, but I wouldn't. But I'm talking about the business of just simply taking down a book and realizing, oh, and the way your life becomes consumed. Henry James described this as that life itself, he said, is incomplete. And the purpose of what the novelist must do is complete it. So by giving it a structure, a shape, by putting style on it, by letting people see it more clearly. So something like that is going on, where you're attempting to interpret life and to show what life is like. And it's not that, I mean, what is my complaint? Well, my complaint is not political. It's not that I would like, you know, some set of political changes to that's not what I'm interested in, and there are novelists who are interested in it, but mine is essentially about existence. It's about evil in us, that when
is it a solace? Can it be a solace and a castigation, I suppose, or is there anything between those two?
Those words are too strong, I think. But it is
between
more or less,
there somewhere.
It is more or less throwing light on something that no one has seen clearly. It's as though there's a movie showing and you just darken the room so everyone can now see the movie for a second, however well. And this is obviously vitally important. It's not as though this is just an extra thing that can be added. We really live in a state of such mystery, or such non-knowing.
Yes.
In relation to life, as to why it's here, how long it's going to last, and what it's ever going to mean. We don't know anything about it.
The stars are very far away.
You know, we live in a permanent state of just not knowing. And so a novelist, it isn't that a novelist gives you the solution to this, but the novelist, I think, offers a way of showing things in time as they move towards completion, so that something or other has been explained, dramatized, but I think the better word might be completed or shown.
And do you feel still that you're, I mean, there's a certain sense where writers, just in reading the lives of writers, there's a sort of, they become sort of orphans as they go on further. Do you feel still the child of someone? Do you still feel that as an important attribute as a writer?
Yes, I suppose I do.
Colm, that's wonderful.
And I suppose I do. In that, the years pass, and you know, unimaginable things happen, such as, you know, people passing on, and suddenly you get used to that, and you know, but it isn't just in my dream life, but it's certainly in that, but also in some way in my daily business, that I'm still living in that orbit, that I've not been released from that family early life orbit.
You've said a really great thing among all the things you say, which is that there's no point going home when all these people are still alive and giving out to them about the rotten things they did to you as a child. You said, what's the point of that?
Thomas Mann's daughter Elizabeth, who was the wisest of the 6 children, said, by 30, you've no further rights to blame your family for who you are. By 30. Up to 30, you can do what you like. But that's the cut-off point. Just get over it by 30.
Yes. I wish you had said that to me earlier as well, because I did rather give out a lot.
3-0.
Yeah. Approaching you was definitely a desire somehow to signal to the world that you and I have been friends for 35 years and have been in strange cahoots together, and really to state how proud I am of that fact, Colm.
I'm proud of it too. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.